I'm really delighted now to introduce Jay Redman. Some of you will already know Jay, I think. He's a Burnley-based visual artist and businessman. Since moving to Burnley 5 years ago, he's been engaged in multiple local arts projects, attempting to grow the cultural ecology of Burnley from the grassroots up. Jay's work is in a number of national collections and draws on his experience as an environmental and social activist. Over to you, Jay.
Don't applaud at the beginning. It could all go horribly wrong. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Mark. I'm always left with, when I see work like that, I'm always left with a really strong emotional reaction. And it takes me at least a day to kind of regather my thoughts. So in the context of that apology to you, I shall plough on. I want to use this opportunity to talk to you today about what contemporary art is, what its value is to the town, and how it needs to be supported. I'd like to talk a little bit about how it can play a role in creating a more cohesive society. That's the kind of theme of this morning. I see Burnley as becoming a much more creative place than it is now, one that nurtures artistic expression in all generations and all communities as part of its strategy for surviving the challenges that we face, climate change, mass migration, austerity in this country, to name just a few. I'm an artist, as Gina says. I work in this town. It's impossible for me not to get excited about the instrumental potential of art. So there are artists in this room who perhaps don't get to make work in the town, and there are change makers in this room who could change that. Perhaps they don't really engage with contemporary art, and perhaps they're rarely afforded the opportunity to talk to artists or to talk about art at all. Most of the time, conversations about art get bogged down in aesthetics, and let's face it, everyone's got an opinion about art. If you're involved professionally in the town's development, it's hardly a good idea to advocate spending precious resources, precious cash, a load of council cash on some sculpture that frankly half the town is going to hate you for commissioning. Half is a conservative estimate. So that's why we need a new conversation, and a conversation where we talk about art as a process and not art as a product. Art as a process is an incredibly powerful tool for change, and that's what I really want you to get excited about today, not the other side of the conversation where we discuss whether or not Damien Hirst is a knob, or whether or not your 5-year-old could paint a better picture. So I'd like to start at the beginning. So A is for audience participation. I'm going to pull a rabbit out of my arse at the end. B is for not the other B word. So what is C for? Please don't swear. So great. So I did what you're doing, and this is kind of where it got me. So there's 29 C words. I hope you can read them at the back. I'm not going to read them all out. So they're just a kind of jumbled collection of created crises that I'm having at any particular moment in my life. I'm going to share all of that angst with you now. I'm going to try not to swear for the purposes of the film, and the fact that this is being sponsored by an MEP. Gina will thank me. So we're just going to go, I'm going to rattle through all 29 of them. If I run out of time, somebody shout, you've been going on for 2 hours. Like I say, they're in no particular order. So this is a picture of some chimneys. I hate art about the industrial past. I don't want to make any enemies on my first slide, but I really think that art about our industrial past should be left to the tourist board. Controversial. London's contemporary art scene, let me put it another way. London's contemporary art scene isn't dominated by all the art being about Jack the Ripper or all the contemporary dance being about the Great Fire of London. So why the hell is all the art that's made in the northwest of England about the cotton industry? It's like asking every artist in Lincolnshire to only make art about the miracle of the seed drill. I don't really see the point. Number two, keep a note of the numbers. Number two, I haven't written them on. Commonality, born here or drawn here. Commonality is the most vital word when we talk about cohesion, and cohesion begins when we realise that we all look up at the same sky. For those of you who know me, you'll have heard my really annoying definition of contemporary art hundreds of times. For those of you who don't, I'm going to do it for you now. Stay with it. It's semantically complicated. So art is the visual interpretation of culture. It's my opinion. So what is culture? Culture is all the stuff that we do that we don't have to do. Everything in between the things that we do to stay alive. So, I'll give you an example. If you walk to a football match, you going to that game, walking to that game, including the walk and the football match, that's all cultural activity. If L.S. Lowry, to pick a random 20th century painter, is taking an afternoon off from painting a variety of middle-aged ladies in bondage gear by the fire in his back room, which is incidentally what he did do. We just don't get shown those pictures because we're not adults. If he takes the afternoon off from doing that and makes a sketch of your twisted face when Blackburn beat you, then that process, all of that, and the object are all art. Going and seeing the painting in the Lowry is cultural activity. The circle is complete. The two things are separate. The point of this is that support for art production and supporting artistic experiences are different things. And I believe you need both of them in a healthy creative ecology. Neither of them really happen without support. But understanding that distinction is vital. Next slide. So I think it's worth noting at this point that there is no official specific cohesion strategy in Burnley. There's nothing written down about community cohesion anywhere in the way this council works, with the exception of a few lines in the strategic plan which don't actually mention any strategy for ending the isolation that most of us hold entirely responsible for the disturbances of 20 years ago that are still used to paint Burnley as a narrow-minded town. Without a cohesion strategy, where do we begin to work together? Cooperation and collectivism. These two criminals I've worked with for the last 15 odd years. Arts production makes relationships visible. This is a social value of encouraging artists to work with local fabricators, manufacturers, and artisans. It's a value equal to or greater than the financial rewards of a boosted local light industry sector. People forget that the art that artists create is not often actually made by them. It takes teams of people, not always woodworkers or welders, all kinds of fabricators, including digital media fabricators. Cash. Okay, well, to say there is no cash is a complete lie. The Arts Council has shitloads of cash, we just don't ask them for it. The Borough Council, Burnley Borough Council, borrows loads of cash. It's about to borrow £27 million to build a cinema. They don't let us artists near a penny of it. Surrounding artists, you don't need to drive very far from this lovely building. The surrounding areas are awash with moneyed, retired people who just avoid the town. Cash makes cash. As we've already heard, every pound spent in the culture sector creates 3 more. Why as a town are we mostly ignoring this huge mountain of cash. Cash. If you have a town full of makers, this is incredibly valuable for the artists in your region. To give you a very short example, this building is the studios that I used to operate with Ian, who you'll hear from later. It's 55,000 square feet of empty warehouse space on the edge of Salford and Manchester. It was called Artwork. It had any time between 70 and 100 people working in it. I'm looking at Ian for correction. Something like that, about 45 spaces. People doing all sorts of things, from reupholstering chairs to illustrating, making lampshades, roasting coffee. Not just painters and time wasters like me, people making actual useful things, but all working creatively. One of the first things we did when we moved into the building was house on the top floor a very large international exhibition of Chinese art. It amazed me to discover that of the 20-odd artists that came, about half of them didn't bring the work with them. It proved to be a hell of a lot more easier, much cheaper, to have the work remade. So they all came over and we basically refabricated their work for them. The point of this, I suppose, is that if you've traveled from China to Manchester for an exhibition of your work, it doesn't really pay to bring the work with you in a shipping container. It's massively expensive, hugely expensive in terms of environmental damage. So that if you can get some local artist to rebuild it for you from your plans, then you're going to do that. And you're not going to really care whether that artist is based in Burnley, Bradford, Barnsley, or somewhere in London. It's a few hundred extra miles isn't going to make any difference to you. So since I moved to Burnley, I've argued that considering our industrial past and our incredible wealth of skills, we should be making art for Chinese artists who are coming over to show their work in London. We can do it cheaper than anyone in London. Gosh, I'm rattling through these. I wanted to make a point about bedroom DJs. Obviously, we all understand when we talk about bedroom DJs that they're not the music industry. No one thinks that this is what the music industry looks like. In the same way that when we sort of crouch at the ends of our beds desperately trying to make a lino cut without making too much mess or the cat eating it, we are not the creative industry. You can make music and you can make visual art without having anything to do with the industry. But if we want to grow the arts, we need the same sort of resources that musicians might expect. Studios, places to make, places to show, and opportunities to perform to the public. If you want to go from being a cottage industry to being part of the industry, the bridge between your bedroom and the general public has to be bridged by resources. Those resources have to be put in place by someone. I kind of still find it shocking that, as we've already said, we're talking about an industry that's bigger than the car industry, and yet what resources are set aside for the creative industries in comparison. So I was doing a little bit of research about this building. Those of you who know the landmark know that it was the grammar school and it was an art school. It was built as an art school. And the very, very earliest days of Burnley College, they didn't hold novels or plays in their libraries, as the arts were perceived as being for the landed and the financially secure classes. So no one was allowed to learn anything too fancy or anything that might encourage them to raise above their station. And you ended up with a kind of not for the likes of me attitude, which I still think persists weirdly to this day, and seems to be preventing working class children, particularly boys and men specifically, from taking up art subjects. I think eventually we're going to end up with a situation in this country where the visual arts, contemporary art, fine art, for want of a better word, is the exclusive pastime of the rich and privileged. Eventually, the only voices in the arts will be double denim wearing, bald, bespectacled, middle-aged men. Do you see what I did there? Coffee shops. Not those ones, these ones. Anyone remember that place? Some arsehole took it over, turned it into something that looks like it's from Shoreditch. Did you just say Shoreditch? High five. So this C word is a B word. It's about being bored. And fellow artist and struggler Sophie Gibson and myself talk a lot about having places to be bored in. These are coffee shops, galleries, pocket parks. Being bored is the best social motivation anyone can find. We need more boring places, and let's not forget that artists are really brilliant at testing the boredom threshold of people with time on their hands. Give us the space, let us do our job, we will give you places to be bored in. A little quick example why this is important. If you come to the town, Burnley, from outside for a meeting or a conference, and there's nowhere to kill an hour while you wait for your train home, your response to anyone asking you, how was your trip, will not include the wonderful hour you killed in the town's quirky backstreet boutique pop-up craft fair. Your response will be, nah, I sat in Costa because they didn't have a Nando's. Independent coffee shops, galleries and parks are how we turn idle time into art. 15 minutes in and I'm going to start bashing the council. Apologies to my husband. Failed state bureaucratic systems. That's it, just in 4 words. This is not the fault of councillors, it's the fault of us not giving them permission to support art without getting shouted at. We should stubbornly demand that our elected representatives support the artists in their town. How stubborn should we be? This stubborn. This is a Japanese nail house. You might be familiar with these. You get them all over China, Japan, mainly when a big highway or big motorway is being built or a runway for an airport, and they can't get all the land consolidated. They end up with these little parcels of people's houses built in the middle of the roads. That is a real lesson in stubbornness, isn't it? Just fantastic. I've got a whole folder full of those pictures. I mean, if anyone ever wants to see them, just search nail houses. So let's keep going with the myth busting. So there's a popular misconception among young artists that they will sell more work if they live in a city. I believe this is only really partly true. It's worth noting that the people who buy art in Manchester are travelling there from massive mansions on the outskirts of, guess where? Burnley, rural Lancashire, Cheshire. So maybe, just maybe, a few galleries, open studios, art fairs in great towns like Burnley would cut down our audience's travelling time. It's the most simple, cynical way of putting it. Put it another way, parking's loads cheaper in Burnley than it is in Manchester, even if you're local and you don't actually believe that. You don't need to live in the city to become a brilliant artist. Hannah Whitlow, that one's for you. Commissioning, this is also for you. For this to work, we need to give artists opportunities in Burnley. Commissions locally will attract artistic talent, and the town gradually becomes a place synonymous with the arts. Industry then gears up to making the artist's visions a reality. Local people realise that their son/daughter would be able to make a living in the new local arts sector because they can see it on their doorstep. So they stop forcing them to become a dentist or an estate agent and encourage them in their new creative career. Income is therefore generated through production, fees, visitors, tourism. Locally based arts organisations become net exporters of artistic talent as opposed to importers of external professionals. The town is down one estate agent. No one notices. This is me at a car boot sale. If there's so much space, why is there no space? Like one of those weird proverbs, isn't it? The use by the arts and cultural sector of meanwhile spaces on high streets creates the type of ecology you might expect if you transferred the entire retail sector into one big car boot sale. I'm eternally grateful for part-time meanwhile spaces, empty shops, about to move into one. It is no substitute for the real thing. So one of my personal heroes, so if you don't really know much about Rachel Carson, she was a trailblazing marine biologist who sparked modern environmental movement with her 1962 book, Silent Spring. So she's known for her environmentalism, but there are really prescient philosophical lessons to be learned from her writings, as well as ecological ones. Carson, when shocked by the destructive power of the nuclear bomb, was less than awed by man's ability to annihilate the world and all of its splendour. This became the focus of her philosophy of awe and wonder. Awe not at man's destructive powers, but at nature's joy. No wonder at our abilities to construct ideas of ourselves and control of our world, but instead renewed excitement at our social connections. For Carson, wonder was a state of mind. For me, concepts of social cohesion become second nature if we focus on what we have in common, instead of using art to constantly pick at the threads of our differences. Rachel was cool. Be more like Rachel. Well, I had to come around sooner or later. Sooner than previously thought. I'm going to use this to talk very, very quickly about this C. Contemporary art can work on so many levels at the same time. It can happen anywhere. When it's good, it's work which is carefully considered, readily contextualized, and of course, it has to be recognized as art. Contemporary art is critical. This is a slide of a piece of work that I made. It was a commission, along with 3 other artists, for a festival organised by myself and Mr. Brownbill, called the Darts Festival at the Whitworth in 2016. I wanted to use it as an example of how art can work on all these many different levels all at once. Challenge itself, be critical of itself, create new social connections, and talk about big subjects. So this is a darts oki in the form of a Renaissance triptych. It's made of wood. It's painted in oils. It's got a dartboard in the middle of it. Myself and 2 other artists created okis for this darts event, where we invited local darts teams to come and compete for a cash prize. And we used the okis in the tournament. We also invited local artists to form darts teams to come and compete against the darts players. The artists were shit. And the darts players knew it. And it kind of interestingly flipped the power relationship. Most of these darts teams, I don't think had ever been to the Whitworth, and I'm pretty sure most of them don't go to art galleries. But there they all were with their families that evening, and we had a very exciting, very drunken, beer-fueled evening in the Whitworth, throwing sharp metal objects at fine art, which again I think helped perhaps undermine the artist's idea of their primacy in the relationship. They were beaten roundly, even by small children. The darts team, obviously, the darts team won, walked off with a cash prize. The piece that I was showing you was inspired by Botticelli's Primavera, and this is kind of where the art bit sort of has its grounding, I suppose. I've been really fascinated by, for many years, the turf under the feet of the characters. I don't know if you can see it picked out here. It's like someone's dropped a bag of Haribo. It's basically just loads and loads of plants in bloom all at the same time. It made me think about climate change and the effects of climate change on flowering species. And I did a little bit of research. The Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, every year on January the 5th, send out all their volunteers into the environment, and they measure how many species are in flower on the 5th of January. You could imagine not many in the middle of winter. And it's quite an interesting little botanical study. It gives us a benchmark for where we are in terms of climate change and where we are in terms of species loss. So it usually, does anyone want to guess how many plants or British native species might be in flower on the 5th of January every year? 20? Yeah, it's 24. Works out around 24 average. So in the year that I looked at, I think it must have been 2015, 2014, the Botanical Survey counted over 600 species that year. And when asked why this was, they put it down to climate change. They said there's just a load more plants, in flower when they shouldn't be. So I got the list of 600, and I set about trying to paint all 600 onto the darts hockey. I got as far as 42. It took me 700 hours. And it was a real high point of my career to date to have a bunch of young people come and throw darts at it. Because as an artist, I understand that everything that we make is not permanent, and that climate change is very real and can sweep all of this away in an instant. So our art galleries are really worth nothing if we're not taking care of everything else. These are the people that won. and our commentator, who some of you will recognise his voice but not his name probably. I can't even remember his name, Ian. John something. He does the darts on Sky. Is he? Next one. So this says creative industries, but it could also say contradictions because there's some chimneys. So the value of the creative industries to the UK is up from 94.8 billion in 2016 to 101.5 billion in 2018, and has grown at nearly twice the rate of the economy since 2010, according to figures from DMCS, that is. So why did I move to Burnley from Manchester? Lots of reasons. But really, artists are being forced out of the cities, and if you've never tried to live and work as an artist in a city, you won't appreciate quite how expensive it is. Nobody really that I know anymore makes a living as an artist. Everyone has got at least 2 jobs, and their practice has been squeezed into the same amount of space you might expect somebody to squeeze a small hobby into. Gentrification policies are to blame. Neoliberal city councils, private property speculators, developers, culture-blind planners are all making the city impossibly expensive for artists to work in. So we need to move beyond the city. I thought, let's just go straight due north and stop when we hit a town. That's pretty much how it happened, isn't it? Burnley needs to open its arms to the arts because there's going to be a lot of refugees from the arts community in the cities. So Burnley needs to be open. It needs to recognise itself as being open, being connected. It has to start welcoming visitors, artists, people that want to see art. It has to start to believe that it's in the middle of everywhere and not in the middle of nowhere. I think you can probably see that from that map. I'm going to rush through these. I've got 2 minutes left. Can you see Spectrum Jesus? You can sort of just about see Spectrum Jesus. So the John Moores Painting Prize is the UK's equivalent of the Oscars for contemporary painting. It would surprise most of the people in this room to learn that 2 Burnley-born and trained artists have been shortlisted for this prize since 2010. Keith Coventry won the prize in 2010, and Pete Clark was longlisted in 2018. And that's a picture of Spectrum Jesus by Keith Coventry. So a little bit of it. Neither of these 2 artists work here anymore. Neither of them, as far as I'm aware, have studios here. And I'm not aware of them ever coming to teach or talk or show here. I think enough has been said about the importance of art in schools, the crisis that we face. So councils are under extreme pressure to axe arts and culture budgets. I hope I've made that point already. Art can and does enrich our towns on so many levels. And even though the case is not made very well or very loudly, investment in creative activity is a moneymaker, not a money waster. We must be proactive in making the case and be vigilant when it comes to holding local government to account. Culture is under attack in our towns and in Burnley. Just like everywhere else, it is the first thing to go. We must fight back or see the town face creative impoverishment, creative desertification, and certain economic diminishment. We need to put art and culture back at the heart of our economic strategy, not see it as a bolt-on, a nice to have, or an afterthought. Other towns have done this successfully, and the idea that it won't wash in Burnley is frankly cowardly. Gosh, am I going to go into this? I've only got 18 seconds left. I'm going to skip to the end. We do some things great here. Arts Council funding. I kind of said before there's a big load of money that we don't go for, but we are learning to get better at it. Burnley still has 1 person paid to engage with the local artist community, and I'm eternally grateful for everything that she does for the town. It's incredibly important that we continue to invite the Arts Council to come to events in this town. We have the capacity to do that, and that we teach local artists how to apply for grant funding. As I've said, the money is out there. We just need to start getting our hands on it. All art is political. At least all good art is. This is a piece that I worked on with Ian. All of this work I did with you. That was funny, isn't it? This is called Engel's Beard. So, those of you who don't know, the Communist Manifesto was first translated into English from German in this town just opposite the Quick Fit Fitters. It wasn't there at the time. This was a commission for Salford University's new arts campus. It's a 5.5 metre tall fiberglass reconstruction of Friedrich Engels's beard. It comes from the fact that Engels spent quite a lot of his time when he was writing on the condition of the English working classes, on which the Communist Manifesto was based, in Salford. It's also inspired by the fact that he had a really great beard. And it recognises that if you're going to put a sculpture on a student campus, students will climb it. So we made it climbable. Why is this on here? Because this was made just on the outskirts of Burnley by a climbing wall company, French climbing wall company called Entreprise. I believe that's how you pronounce it. They employ over 200 people in the world, making climbing walls mainly for cruise ships. This, I believe, is the only communist beard they've ever made. It's here to illustrate the point that art involves, like I say, all of these technical expertise and all of these fabricators, and these fabricators are in this town, and we need to start talking to them, start working with them. Thank you.